Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, 21st Century Federal Performance. This webinar is sponsored by the ASTD, the American Society for Training and Development, and also the Public Manager. Together, these two organizations are sponsoring an unconference, which is a flexible format for a conference. It's called Government Workforce, which will be held on November 2nd in Washington, D.C., and there will be more information about this conference at the end of the presentation. So since this conference that we're leading up to is an unconference, today our format is going to be a little bit different than a typical webinar. Instead of PowerPoint slides, our speaker, Bob Tobias, is going to do an unwebinar. We're going to open for discussion with the audience and with his expert information, two topics about the role of the Office of Personnel Management, the role that they should play inside creating a performance management system and ensuring that employees are accurately evaluated. So once the webinar begins, you can type questions or comments or discussion points into the Q&A chat window that's in the lower right corner of your screen. Any questions that you have, I will post to Bob and write onto the whiteboard, and that will open hopefully a lively discussion. With that, let me introduce our speaker. Robert Tobias is the director of the Distinguished Adjunct Professor in Residence at the American University. He also is a member of the Internal Revenue Service Oversight Board. So you can either love him and thank him for his service, or be upset about the IRS over that. And prior to the American University, he worked for 31 years at the National Treasury Employees Union. You can see Bob here. So with that, I'm going to switch our screen over to our whiteboard, and we will start the discussion of the first topic. So Bob, if you want to take over.
The idea is how do we create a performance management system that links organizational outcomes to a more objective work standard? There's a great deal of data that shows that the only factor that truly motivates public sector employees is having a link between what they do and mission accomplishment. So the question is, if that's true, and I think it is true, what role should OPM play in creating such a performance management system? Should it be a system that allows agencies to design their own systems, similar to the approach the Department of Defense took with the National Security Personnel System, where each organization creates its own system based on the principles developed by the Department of Defense? Or should OPM create something that goes government-wide? Which approach makes the best sense, and why? So
Okay, I'm just highlighting those two options here, and people in the audience, before we hear Bob's position on that, if you want to start posting information in the Q&A screen, then that will give us some more information for feedback. So, Bob, if you want to go ahead and let us know your opinion.
Well, the option one is agencies design their own system with department-level principles. There are pluses and minuses with that. The plus is that it gives the maximum flexibility to agencies. The minus is it may impede individuals going from one agency to another. And I think in today's world, we're going to be needing cross-agency individuals who are willing to go across agencies to create the connections that are needed to solve large problems. We've seen that in the past with the intelligence agencies, the 16 separate intelligence agencies, who failed to connect the dots. And one of the solutions there was to require people to go into another agency before they get a promotion. So that's sort of the plus and minus, and I'd be very interested in how you see those pluses and minuses, and if you see other pluses and minuses.
Okay, well, we're still waiting for some some comments to come in from the audience. Do you have more examples besides the intelligence agencies about this minus of impeding movement, and how a single system or something governed by the Office of Personnel Management might assist that?
Well, I think that right now the culture is that people don't go from agency to agency. It's sort of death to my career. If I move from one agency to another, I can't come back. So people tend to stay in their agency and or stay in their organization, which impedes the creating connection and understanding between separate stovepipes. But again, on the other hand,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, agencies do perform different work, and they need different performance standards, and if OPM designs them, it won't achieve the goal of motivating people to perform more in the future. That's sort of the trade-off.
I have a question coming in. Want to hear more about how the intelligence system worked as far as requiring people to be moved to other agencies, and what the results were about how it changed how people worked and were promoted once they had moved from one agency to another.
When the act that created the National Intelligence System, there were 16 separate organizations in 6 separate departments of the federal government. And there was the second head decided that what was really needed in response to the failure of the intelligence community to connect the dots in connection with 9/11, that there needed to be more, they needed to understand what the other people did, what the other organizations did. And the only way that could happen is if they actually worked there. And they wanted to create something called a collaborative culture. So they just instituted the rule that until you have experience in other organizations, you will not be promoted. And they put that in place. And as I heard actually this morning from Ron Sanders, who's the person who was the head of human resources when that was put into place, 10,000 people have now had experience in other intelligence agencies in connection with their promotion. So it's worked pretty well.
And so that was, Ron Sanders, you said, was kind of the feedback from the top. Has there been any surveys done or kind of a general feeling of these 10,000 people as far as what they liked and disliked about that sort of system?
I don't know. I'm unaware of any surveys of those 10,000 people.
And of those people, have the promotions occurred, or has there been hesitancy inside the agencies to I know this person better because he moved once or she moved once and stayed somewhere for 5 years versus somebody that maybe moved 5 times in 10 years and didn't make deeper relationships?
Well, 10,000 people in that community over a period of, I think, 4 years or 5 years is a huge number of people who have transferred. So anecdotally, I could say that the system is being accepted.
And the second part of the question was, do you have evidence, did this cross-agency create the collaborative culture? Did it change how people worked? Were the end results beyond the collaborative culture, which I guess was fewer intelligence failures, were those things achieved by these actions?
The intelligence community does not share that kind of information, so I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that the practice and policy has been continued. It hasn't been ended.
Oh, that's a validation. Are there other agencies that you know that have done this sort of scale or something smaller outside of the intelligence community?
I'm unaware of departments who foster that kind of cross-acculturation. And I'm really unaware of large agencies like DHS or agriculture or state that encourage, or as the intelligence community does, demand that people learn about other organizations before they get promoted. So I think the intelligence community is the only place where this is happening as a prerequisite to promotion.
And in the intelligence community, another question came in, did the Office of Personnel Management play any role in that process?
The law made them free actors, so they could do whatever they wanted to do. So OPM had no role. OPM, I take that back. OPM had an approval role. So they could have said, you can't do that, but they did. They approved everything that the intelligence community created.
So this would be an example of the option 1 that we have here, the agencies designing their own system. Is that correct?
The agencies designing their own system with OPM approval.
With OPM approval. And do you have any examples of the other option, the opposite way, where the OPM designed the system?
Well, the current system, OPM has designed it, and the criticism of the system is that it's too restrictive. It doesn't provide enough flexibility to organizations. It's really a statutory system that's I think it was 1946 when it was put in place. OPM implemented, but it's a statutory-based system. And so the question would be, should the statute, if people believe that agencies ought to have more flexibility, the statute would have to change to allow that to happen.
Are there any proposals, another question, are there any proposals to change the statute, and if so, what would it look like? Would it look more like what the intelligence community and Department of Defense have done, or are there people, lawmakers, that are thinking maybe further ahead?
There are no proposals. There are no legislative proposals, nor has OPM offered any proposals.
Somebody wants to know what's your opinion between these options? Do you think that the statute needs to be changed?
Well, I think that the performance management portion of the national security personnel system was a pretty good system. Now, the National Security Personnel System had a lot of other elements to it, but if you just focus on the performance management system, I think it did a pretty good job. And one of the indicia of how good it was a survey was conducted of the 205,000 people who were on that performance management system, all supervisors and managers, and 93% of them said that they understood the link of their work to organization success, which is the most important element in any performance, in any successful performance management.
And 93%. All right, and again, for those in the audience, some people have joined late, so this is an unwebinar. So we have two topics being proposed by our presenter, Bob Tobias, about how the federal government should perform in the 21st century. The first topic here is if the Office of Personnel Management should have a role in creating a performance management system that links organizational outcomes to a more objective standard, which approach we should take, and we're really soliciting feedback from the audience. Thank you for those comments we've had so far. Want to know your opinions on this topic, if agencies should design their own system, or if the centralized OPM should have a statute change to design a system across government. Bob, was there anything else you wanted to add on this topic?
Well, the other sort of tangential topic is the how objective should the performance standards in a performance management system be? And sort of a corollary question, how much of the standards should be output standards and how much of them should be outcome standards? One of the common criticisms of the current system is that the standards are basically in the eye of the evaluator, so that the person evaluated is not clear on what she must do in order to get a higher evaluation. So the issue of objectivity is also present, a very important, in my view, question in the creation of a performance management system.
It almost sounds like there could be a hybrid option where the Office of Personnel Management trains the agencies to design their own system based on best practices such as this. Because it seems to me that when you talk about things like the output versus outcome, or the person being judged did not understand what they were being judged on, that seems like a clear problem, not so much something that should be decided about, but something that should definitely be fixed regardless of the agency you're in. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, another approach would be a hybrid, if you want to call it a hybrid system, where OPM would set standards and say, if you meet these standards, then we will approve your system. It has to be approved, but it has to meet a certain set of standards. So then the question, OPM would then set standards with the idea of giving discretion to agencies to meet their own needs. That's another approach.
All right, that's going to be our hybrid. Would that require statute also change?
It would. It would.
The OPM sets the standards, agencies design their systems. Okay. If there's any other feedback on this topic or anything that comes in, we can actually come back to this, but in the interest of time, I want to go ahead and be able to cover our second point. So, Bob, we ready to move to that slide?
Sure.
All right. I'm out of space on that whiteboard anyway. Okay, so this is another question about the Office of Personnel Management's role. And how should they ensure that employees are accurately evaluated and professionally developed? Do you want to go ahead and give us the background for this?
Sure. You know, the traditional approach to budget cutting is to cut training and travel, and cut those in HR who might assist in the development and implementation of a performance management system. So the question is, what role might OPM play in helping agencies to understand that cutting training, cutting leadership development programs is counterproductive both in the short and the long run. Because if you're trying to do more with less and people aren't trained to do more with less, then you're going to do less. So what role should OPM play in assisting agencies to recognize that reality?
Okay, and so the question has been posed. Before I ask Bob for some of the opinions and sides that he has, please, if you have an opinion on this topic, go ahead and submit it in the Q&A window in the lower right, and then I will read out those questions as they come in. So in the meantime, Bob, do you have some opinions of your own on what should be done to address the budget cut issue?
Well, during the Clinton administration, when there were about 250,000 positions cut, the people who took the biggest hit were those in HR. And then of course, ever since that happened, there have been constant complaints about effective hiring, effective onboarding, effective training, effective promotion plans. So it's not surprising that when you eliminate a whole cohort of those who have been providing that kind of support, that there are going to be consequences. And agencies are facing that same question again. They have been facing it, and I think it's going to be more acute in the 2012 budget. So the question is, how am I going to react to that challenge? Am I going to think in the short run? Am I going to think in the long run? Am I going to think in the medium run? And what role should OPM play in helping agencies to evaluate short, medium, or long run consequences of the decisions they're making?
Do you have any feedback from Congress and legislatures as far as if they are making statutory considerations in the budget cuts about cutting training and development, things like that, or is this just something that has traditionally happened in the past?
Well, what happens is that Congress allocates fewer dollars, and agencies have to decide where they're going to cut. So Congress doesn't say you should cut HR people or you should cut program people. It just says this year you're going to get fewer dollars.
We had a comment that just came in. Any directions that don't have funding are not going to get implemented in practice unless there are consequences to the agency for that. Could you say that again? Yes, the comment was that any directions that are not funded will not be implemented unless there are consequences to the agency. for these directions. And so I guess his point is if there's not funding specifically put in place to make sure that employees continue to have HR training, travel, that that the agencies won't make it a priority unless they have a consequence behind it. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think it will be hard for agencies to make that decision because they're only, most agencies are about 80% of their budget are people. If you take away those agencies that do a lot of grants and only look at their operations, 80% are people. So the question then is not which people, it's not whether you have to get rid of people through attrition, but which people you have to get rid of. And so the question is, do I get rid of program people, support people, or a balance? And in the past, the approach has been, I'm going to get rid of support and not program people. And that, that's I think that's certainly a legitimate approach because heads of departments get criticized a great deal when when the public complains about programs not delivered. So it makes sense that I would not want to cut program people, and that's certainly a short-term approach. A longer-term approach is I might get away with delivering program in year 1 and year 2 when I cut support people, but by year 3, when people who are delivering the service aren't trained, when leaders who are leading the programs are not developed, years 3, 4, and 5, these programs will deteriorate in their ability to serve the public, and the criticism will come then.
And so is there just anecdotal information about that, or is there any studies that have been done that show this this clear correlation between the program suffering when the support staff is cut?
Well, there were lots and lots of studies done by IGs and GAOs and think tanks around the decisions that the Clinton administration made, and there were none of them that were complimentary. They chose to cut support.
We have a comment. Go ahead.
In fact, directed that support be cut.
And another comment just came in. If there are any plans for the OPM to better develop the learning and development community so that it is more able to adopt more effective methods to address knowledge and skills gaps. The LND workforce has major knowledge gaps.
I understand they're thinking about that, but there are no there have been no policies issued, regulations issued to implement those discussions and thoughts.
And how, so in relation to this question that you asked about is it possible to leverage OPM's role, it sounds like you probably have a proposal or an answer there, or were you just kind of throwing the question out for discussion?
Well, I am throwing it out for discussion because agencies, most agencies aren't interested in having OPM tell them what to do. They want to make their own decisions, because in the end they're responsible for what happens in the agency. So it's highly controversial to say that OPM should have any role in agencies making these decisions. So I really am curious about how people feel about that.
So we will put that question out. If anybody has strong opinions or suggestions, please type that into the Q&A screen. Again, the focus is it possible to leverage OPM's role so that you can assist agencies that make decisions about cutbacks and make sure they recognize the importance of ensuring the agency's performance through accurate evaluation and development. So if there's any suggestions, questions, difficulties about that, please feed that in. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, Bob, are there any other topics in this area from your past experience that you think might help agencies that are dealing with cutbacks? For example, a question would be if you went with this balanced approach, which you seem to be supporting, where would the balance lie in between support and program people? And how would you determine that?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? If OPM dictated what the balance would be, then agencies would object to that. If OPM advises agencies, they then can ignore it. So I'm really interested from the perspective of those who are going to have to deal with the result of OPM not intervening, what they think about the impact of that decision.
So the two extremes are either the OPM has power to enforce and there'll be revolt among the agencies, or they only have advisory role and then they're ignored.
Well, that's the risk. Yeah, that's the risk. Because historically, agencies have made the decision that when budgets are cut, program people are protected, support people are cut. I mean, that's the history of reduced budgets.
And so for those of you that are in the audience, the question that our presenter poses to you is how can the balance be decided if the federal government wants to prevent 100% or a majority of the cutbacks coming in the support area? How could the OPM help to guide agencies to balance those cutbacks so that the program area is strengthened even though some personnel in the program department might be cut back? So please publish those comments into the Q&A area. Bob, in the past cutbacks in the Clinton administration, did any agencies do things better or right? Did any agencies try this balance, or was it pretty much across the board a support cutback?
Well, the Clinton administration directed that the cutbacks come in two places, in support and delayering management levels. So in other words, instead of, I can't remember exactly what the ratios were, I think they wanted a supervisory to employee role to go from 8 to 10 or 11 to 1. So increase the number of people who reported to a supervisor, decrease the layers of management, and decrease support people. Those were the three areas where agencies were directed to cut. So there was no discretion. And it was that the criticism of the post-decision was the large percentage of cuts in support. HR people, acquisition management people, were the two areas that received the largest criticism.
And so if there was 250,000 people cut in the Clinton cutbacks, how big is this problem going to be from what you've seen, practically speaking, for the cutbacks that are expected this year and the next budget cycle?
We will know when the 2012 budget is finally passed by Congress. We'll have a real clear picture of the number of cuts that agencies are going to have to make. There are so many numbers flying around right now, it's impossible to calculate. But once the 2012 budget is finalized by Congress, we'll have a very clear idea.
And there's no ballpark if it's going to be bigger or smaller than what they went through in the Clinton administration?
Not at this point. It could be smaller or it could be larger. I mean, there are proponents in Congress who would make it larger, and then there are those who say it should be smaller.
So we're still open for this discussion topic. If any people have suggestions for those that are going to be facing cutbacks potentially in support areas, how can you ensure that employees are accurately evaluated and professionally developed? And we have a comment that came in. The comment was, OPM guidance would be great, but until the budget is tied to HRD widgets of some type, the agencies won't put dollars towards HRD. What would be appropriate avenue for translating these HRD widgets into budget dollars?
HRD
I believe that would be the, yeah, they should put widgets is what they comment. So to Carol, if you could clarify the widgets, the HRD is the human resource development.
Right.
And
yeah, if you could clarify that.
If you could clarify what you meant by the widgets of some type. It sounds like maybe what she means is that the budget has to specify some human resource development line items. Otherwise, the agencies won't volunteer to put any money into those efforts. So her question is then, what would be the appropriate avenue to take a specific item in HRD and turn it into budget dollars? Here's a comment back. Well, widgets would be the number of supervisors trained in performance evaluations, the number of beginning supervisors trained, and so on.
Well, traditionally, I mean, anything is possible. Traditionally, Congress has not said you must spend so many dollars on training and development. But OMB could. OMB could say you've received $100 and you have to spend a minimum of 1% or 3%, whatever, on skill development and leadership development. And so OMB could do that. Or a third alternative would be OPM could advise that that be done. So those are the three options for making that happen.
And so could I get these documented right? So first, Congress could direct it, OMB could enforce it as, for example, a percentage. And that would again be a directive?
That would be a directive, or OPM could advise.
Have any of these happened in the past?
No. They haven't. It's all been left to the discretion of the agencies.
Do you have any insight? This might be outside of your realm of experience, but in the, say, the private sector, when they go through cutbacks, have they tended to do similar things that you're talking about, delayering management, losing support, suffering performance, or have any private sector right-size operations been successful that you think the federal government might learn from?
Well, I'm not familiar with any companies who've successfully done this, but what I can say is those who, in the face of declining revenues, who have cut the support component, have taken longer to come back than those who did a balanced approach. And the place where it happened most recently, where there could be a comparison, was in the airline industry after 9/11. Southwest Airlines, even though they were facing declining revenues, cut no one, and they were the first to be profitable. American Airlines cut the most, and it took them the longest period of time to become profitable.
And I'll make a note of that comment. I had to go to another page since I ran out. We had another question, two questions actually have come in. First, has, and I think you mentioned that there have been studies. Has a study been conducted on the impact of the Clinton cuts, and what impact has resulted to the effectiveness and efficiency of the federal sector?
Well, as I said, there were many studies of the Clinton cuts in the HR area, and particularly in the acquisition management area, where they were considered support and they were cut. And what the studies have shown is that there were huge mistakes made. Programs were not on budget. They were late. And instead of what agencies did, because they had to eliminate their acquisition workforce, was they hired contractors. And agencies found that the contractors, or many of the contractors, were inefficient and ineffective. So the bottom line is that the cuts cost the government a lot of dollars in bad decision making, and a lot of dollars in terms of people not receiving the support, the training support, the leadership development support they needed to be successful.
And were any dollar amounts, follow-up question, that was or any dollar amounts assigned to that? For example, comparing how much money was saved during the cutbacks versus how much was lost due to these contractors being hired, the inefficiency, ineffectiveness?
I can't remember. I don't think so, but I really just can't remember.
Okay. If there are any other questions coming in on this topic, or anything else that you wanted to bring up about our second point, I will go back again to the question about how we can ensure employees are accurately evaluated and professionally developed, even in the face of cutbacks. I guess one question I would have is, what's your opinion of the current status? So if there were no cutbacks, for example, do you think the support to program ratio is effective today?
I think it's potentially successful. The problem that we have today is whether there's a real will to insist on that leaders be adequately trained and developed to do their work. I mean, everybody knows that the federal workforce is getting old, and there are going to be a lot of people leaving with their knowledge, with their experience, and most outside observers who look at how the federal workforce is aging conclude that the federal government is not doing what it needs to do to prepare itself for the number of people who are going to leave in the next 5 to 7 years. So that fact, coupled with the cuts that agencies are facing, make this a perfect storm.
And do you have any numbers on that loss in the next 5 to 7 years, percentage-wise, exactly how big the problem is?
Well, for example, 50% of the members of the senior executive service will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years. And the same percentage at the GS-15 level. So what that means is the people who are ready with both experience and competencies to assume these positions are going to be in short supply very soon.
And so is the next tier, you're saying not prepared, or are the problems going to be further on down the tiers of employees?
Well, what I'm saying is that currently agencies are not doing what they need to do to get people prepared. So if they make the decision to cut support, it's only going to be worse, not better.
Okay, here comes another question. What role should OPM have in succession management? That fills right in here with what you're talking about the retirement over the next 5 years. So what role should OPM have in succession management?
Well, right now, OPM has insisted that agencies actually do succession planning. In other words, calculate how many vacancies they're going to have in the future, and agencies have done that. And the question is there the will to allocate the funds necessary to get people ready to assume the positions? And so far there hasn't been.
So they've analyzed how bad their problem is, but decided not to solve it because there's not funds to solve it.
Correct. Right, and it's going to get worse.
And I have 2 follow-up questions for that as soon as I finish typing. Are agencies preparing and training people to be more efficient? In effect, these people that are leaving, we would not replace them because the ones that remain would be more efficient. So are agencies preparing and training people to be more efficient?
Well, there are 2 kinds of training. One is skill development, and the other is leadership development. And I think it's leadership development where leaders assume the responsibility for supporting innovation and increased efficiency. And I don't think enough of that has been done.
And is that potential path to solve some of the problems? Instead of trying to match the numbers of people that need to replace the upcoming retirements, would it be more effective to invest in this leadership development and be able to have the next generation do more with less effectively?
Well, I think that's one of the, I think that's the question that agencies face. And that's the question that agencies face. So who's going to make that decision? Who's going to make that decision, if anybody? Congress, OMB, or OPM is really the question we're discussing, and where that balance gets struck.
Okay, a follow-up is, so if the agencies aren't doing what needs to be done, why isn't there a sense of urgency to address the problems? If they've identified these problems, why is there no sense of urgency to address them?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I really do. I mean, there are a lot of theories, but I don't know the answer to that question, other than agents, political leaders have been free to kick the can down the road as opposed to face the problem now.
Okay, that was, I think we've cleared through the questions on that second topic. Are there, I'm not sure if you got answers that you were posing to the group, Bob, or if there were other things that you wanted to discuss about the second topic.
No, I'm not. I'm really interested in having people think about these issues. So I have nothing else to add.
Okay, with that we will wrap things up. Again, the overview was that we were discussing the role of the Office of Personnel Management in creating performance management systems versus letting agencies let them design their own systems. And the second topic was how to ensure employees are accurately evaluated and developed in light of support cutbacks. We've recorded this session, and so if you have interest to see these slides, you'll be able to access them on our website within about an hour. Let me go to our back to our presenters page, and just a second, and we will thank our presenter, Bob Tobias, and here is all of his contact information. We also thank our sponsors, ASTD and the Public Manager. And again, this is an extension of training and development into the government workforce. The Government Workforce Conference is going to be held on Wednesday, November 2nd at 7 a.m. at the museum at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And you can get more information about that conference, which is, again, an unconference format with open discussions such as these. And we hope to see many of you there, and you can get that information at the governmentworkforce.org website. With that, I'll thank you again, Bob. Did you have any other parting comments?
I don't. Thank